For more on this, let's bring in the editor-in-chief over at BNE IntelliNews, Ben Aris. He joins us now live from Berlin. Ben, good to have you on the show. Always a pleasure to speak with you. I'm going to begin with the same question I asked Dasha, with Russia sort of saying this conflict is now between Moscow's forces and the NATO military alliance. I mean, you could see the merit in that argument with all the weapons that are being sent over, but do you agree with that assessment?
Well, yes and no, exactly. I mean, the Russians have been saying from the beginning that this is a proxy war, that the US is fighting to the last Ukrainian. And, well, if you put it bluntly, that if the West, if NATO in particular, NATO members, had not given Ukraine the weapons that it has given, this war really would have been over in a matter of weeks. And all the arms material in the field at the moment, I mean, the Javelin US-supplied missiles were absolutely devastating to Russia's tank forces, that Russia was expected to take control of the air within the first 3 days. That didn't happen because Manipads were bringing down helicopters and fighters. Nevertheless, it's kind of on a technicality. I mean, Stoltenberg there in the remarks at the beginning of this bit was saying specifically that Russia should be taken seriously, and that, you know, that NATO is very concerned about going too far. So technically, it is a war between Ukraine and Russia. However, at some point, the Russians will technically see it as a direct conflict with NATO. And that's why this issue of the tanks that they're talking about sending is so important, because those are offensive weapons. Most of what we've received so far are defensive weapons. And at that point, Russia might take the line that, look, actually, we're being now attacked offensively by NATO weapons, and this is no longer about protecting Ukraine. This is about defeating Russia because of the nature of these tanks that are being sent. And so declare war on NATO, and then boom, we're into the Third World War.
That's a really good point that you make. When you look at what's happened in the last 10 days, first you have this massive New Year's Eve attack on Russia, on Russian forces, allegedly killing 400, although the Kremlin says it's just under 90. And then you have this retaliatory strike, which was quite large. Do you feel that these two attacks is going to deepen, perhaps drag this conflict into a new and even uglier phase?
I mean, if you ask me, we're already at a pretty ugly phase, in so much as both sides have dug their heels in. And there's been a lot of talk starting in September about possible peace negotiations, but the two sides are so far apart that, you know, on the one hand, the Kremlin says, yes, we're up for peace talks, but only if you concede the 4 regions that we annexed but don't actually control anymore. And from the Zelensky side, in April, and when there was an initial round of peace talks, he was prepared to make compromises and give up the NATO aspirations, redeclare Ukraine as neutral. But now, in a speech, one of his video messages he gave just a few days ago, he said, look, we're not going to talk to the Russians until A, they leave the country, and B, we get back our 1991 borders. So they totally quit, including the Crimea, which the Russians will never do. And as long as they take these lines, then there's no chance for even starting peace talks. And so they're just hammering away at each other. And the Ukrainian strike on the barracks that killed, you know, the 80 or 400 soldiers is just going to incense people on the Russian side, and the Russian retaliation and all of the brutality and mass murders and tortures that's been going on has led to the point where the Ukrainians are not going to give up. There was a poll just came out last week, and it said 94% of Ukrainians will not accept any territorial concessions whatsoever, which means they're prepared to fight to the bitter end. And for that, they need the West's help, and the West is so far providing it.
And that includes the entire region of Donbass, as well as the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia annexed in 2014. Let me look at the situation in terms of what's happening on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. I think you would agree that really not much has really changed in the last several weeks. I mean, yes, you're talking about Bakhmut and this new town of Soledar, but do you expect this to be sort of like the main narrative for the foreseeable future in these winter months?
I do. I mean, winter's obviously slowed things down, and after Sorokin, the new general, came in and left Kherson, he's taken a line where he's building up his defenses to buy some time. And he's taken all of the troops from Kherson and put them into defensive positions, and plus they've had 300,000 conscripts from the mobilization in September, and those have also been deployed in defense, and they've dug in. Having said that, you talk to all the analysts, everybody is predicting major counteroffensives, both from the Ukrainians, but particularly from the Russians. And it seems that the Russians are taking the time at the moment to train the new recruits, to make them more effective, and to produce more ammunition, because both sides are running low on shells. But Russia's already put its economy onto an industrial war footing and is manufacturing shells. New missiles manufactured in August are already turning up on the battlefield. And when they're ready, then we can expect an offensive. And when that will happen, I mean, people are saying any time between January and May, even in the spring, it could happen. So I think for the moment, we're just going to see this grinding war of attrition. Yeah. And then there should be another offensive that will happen in the coming months.
And that is exactly what Jens Stoltenberg said. The Russians are mobilizing more, they're sending in more equipment, and there's no indications that the Russians are backing down. All right, Ben Aris, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the NewsHour.